Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to learn how to use one of these right here. Stick around, let's find out what it is. Alright guys, today we're going to learn how to use a spot welder. What is a spot welder? Well, a spot welder is used to join two or more overlapping pieces of metal. So instead of using a continuous bead or line that you would use with, say, a MIG welder, TIG welder, or even a stick welder, spot welders use a high electrical current and some pressure to melt and fuse the metals together at small points or spots without having to use any filler material. You'll see spot welders used a lot in the automotive industry, whether it's repair or even manufacturing. Definitely in a lot of sheet metal fabrication, even in battery building. And believe it or not, in orthodontics when they're attaching metal to your molars. Now this is a 120 volt spot welder. So you can plug it into a regular 120 volt socket in your garage or shop. But they do have higher voltage spot welders like 240 volt if you need that. So let's break down the components of the spot welder. This right here is the operating handle. Right now it's down, but when you lift it up, you notice that this raises up. Now this is one of two tongs. This is the upper tong and this is the lower tong. Now as you can see, these two tongs extend from the main body of the machine and they hold and align the welding tips, which are these, the electrodes. So in conjunction with the handle, they basically act like a clamp to deliver the necessary force to the material that you're going to spot weld. So when you bring the handle back down, the upper tong also descends. And as you can tell, the tongs are made of copper, which is great for electrical conductivity. Now it's what's called a class 2 copper because it contains chromium, which makes the copper harder so it doesn't bend or wear down from the heat and the pressure. So underneath the lever, you also have a fixed handle, and you also have this wire inside the fixed handle, as you can see. When you bring this lever down to clamp your workpieces together, that activates a switch inside the handle. And the wire inside the fixed handle connects the switch to an internal transformer, and that tells the machine to load up the amps and dump the low voltage welding current into the copper tongs. Now, because the handle is the primary contact point for your hands, and because that internal switch deals with the line voltage, whether it's 120 or 240, depending on the model, the thick insulation on this wire, and it is thick, make sure that you won't get shocked. Also, a lot of heat is generated by these spot welders. So the insulation on the wire is also rated to withstand the heat that's being generated, whether it's from regular use or extended duty cycles. What's a duty cycle? Well, in welding, it's a very important metric to know. For example, this welder has a 50% duty cycle at a rated output of 1.5 kilovolt amps. And that's based on a 10-second period, meaning that you only have 5 out of 10 seconds to operate the machine or weld before you have to give it a rest, so to speak. If you exceed 5 seconds or whatever your duty cycle time is, then your machine will risk overheating. So one of the first things you want to know is, what is your welding machine's duty cycle? Okay, so you may be looking at the tongs and saying to yourself, well, those tongs are not aligned. This one's over here and this one's over there. And it's understandable, but it's an illusion. You first have to install your electrodes or welding tips to see if they align or not. We want to raise our upper tong and take our electrode tip, screw it on, and take one for the lower tong and screw that on. And you take a wrench and tighten it, but you don't want to over tighten them. And you got two more because at some point they will get worn down through use because of the heat and so forth. Now when you bring the upper tong back down, you see that it aligns perfectly with the lower tong electrode. And that's what you want. Always make sure that the upper tong and lower tong electrodes align correctly before you do any welding. If they're out of alignment and you have to make adjustments, you have to loosen these 4 cap screws on the top here to adjust the upper tong. So once the screws are loose, you can adjust it by pulling it out or in as necessary. You'll do the same thing for the lower tong. On the bottom, you have these 4 screws here that you would loosen, and you would adjust the lower tong and tighten the screws back again. On this model, you're going to need an Allen wrench for these screws. Okay, so we know how to adjust our tongs, but how much pressure do we apply to the operating lever when we're spot welding? You don't want to use your tongs as a vise and apply too much pressure just to hold the material between the electrodes. That can damage the electrode tips. If you need to, you want to use separate clamps to hold your pieces of metal together before putting them between the electrodes. Now, if you want a good weld, you have to make sure that the pressure being applied by the tongs is enough to give you that good weld. If the pressure is not enough or too weak, your workpieces or your metal is going to be loose between the electrodes. And that's going to produce an electrical arc when the current is applied. And you're going to have a no good weld if you have any weld at all. So if that happens, you need to increase the pressure. And to do that, you would need to loosen this nut right here. This is the front jam nut. The more you loosen this nut, the more pressure you're going to have on the electrode tips when you push down the operating lever. So once you dial in your pressure settings, you want to turn this nut back here, the rear jam nut, towards this piece right here. It's called the upper tongue holder until it butts up against it. Now on the opposite end, if you're applying too much pressure, the tongue pressure is too strong, what's going to happen is you're going to have a dimple in your weld with molten metal surrounding it. So to prevent that and lower the pressure, you want to loosen the rear jam nut and then turn the front jam nut towards the upper tongue holder to lock in the setting. Now this cap screw back here is going to determine how firmly the tongs hold your material. The further down you screw this, the further down the operating lever will go, which means you're able to apply more pressure. You just want to make sure that you adjust the screw to allow the operating lever to be raised easily after you're done welding. Now you can also adjust the pressure required to push down the operating lever by turning these screws right here on the front housing. All right, so this is the power switch right here. You want to activate this when you have the material clamped between the electrodes. You can switch it in either direction, right or left, to apply the electrical current. Now when you're getting ready to weld, you want to make sure that your material doesn't have any grease, oil, mill scale, rust, anything like that. This spot welder can weld materials with a combined thickness of 1/8 of an inch. Now this is 2 pieces of 22 gauge sheet metal, so we should be fine. So we want to place our material in between the electrodes, bring the electrodes down to clamp the material in, and just hit the switch. And remember, you only have 5 seconds to apply your weld. That was less than 5 seconds. There's your spot weld right there. And as you can see, it's pretty much welded. If I try to separate them, it's going to start to crease. So this thing is welded. You can see the other side right there. All right, so we have some even thicker sheet metal. This is 16 gauge sheet metal right here, 2 pieces, which is still less than 1/8 of an inch, just a little bit under it. So we'll see how this works. All right, so you see the weld right there. Didn't quite go through, so we see that the weld didn't take. So let's try that again. Now that's a bigger weld, as you can see by the diameter of it. And that's because I spent a few more seconds on the spot weld. That's the back of it. So let's see here. Now that weld did take. So with thicker metal, you got to add a few more seconds to that weld time. And once again, the electrode tips will get deformed during use. They're going to start to flatten out. But the manual gives you specific instructions on how to restore the tip of your electrodes using a file or a dresser tool. Keeping the tip clean is also very important. Oh yeah, one more thing. It does come with a handle. And don't forget to unplug your machine if you're going to do any kind of maintenance at all, whether you're adjusting the tongs or replacing the electrode tips. Safety first.